Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and today we are talking about a very certain book, but let's start with some introductions. So firstly, Fraser.
Hello, my name's Fraser Simons. I have a channel, Fraser Simons Springboard Thought, that confuses people because they search for my name or my channel, but it's in both. I thought I was winning, but I was losing because it just confuses people. And I read a lot of books. That's all you need to know about me.
I sympathize with feeling like it's too late now to change the title of my channel, the name of my channel after so long. Anyway, and then on to Zena.
Sorry, hi, I'm Zena from Beating Around the Books. I'm also not so sure about the name of my channel anymore, but it is what it is, and we're sticking with it. I mean, I like a silly pun, but also it's not that easy to find, I think. But yeah, well, what can you do? I think you find AC/DC usually. You find Beating Around the Bush, AC/DC, when you, anyway. Whatever. I also read books nowhere near as many as Bob or Fraser, but I try. Yeah. And I post much less regularly, so if you subscribe, you're not going to get a shit ton of notifications.
I mean, you say that you've also clearly mastered lighting better than I have, so don't be too harsh. But today we are going to be talking about a book by another booktuber, Marc Nash, the book Time After Time. And Zena, if you'd lead us in, that sounds like I'm about to ask you to do a little jazz intro. Instead, I'm asking you to do a synopsis of this book. Although a jazz intro is not that sort of far away from this book really itself.
Maybe not jazz, but yeah. Anyway, okay, so Time After Time. This is, I guess, well, could you call it feminist sci-fi? Maybe let's just call it sci-fi. That includes time travel, obviously. Or maybe not obvious. It is obvious, I think. Anyway, sci-fi, time travel. What's the premise for the time travel? Some men want to travel back in time because they are living in a matriarchy in which they are being oppressed. And they want to go back in time to, well, you know, make that not happen by killing somebody. You know, somebody who is like this, who then becomes, or well, I guess at the time was the sort of inspiring revolutionary who sort of started this whole chain of events off. And they want to make sure that this person doesn't get born, I think. Yeah, that was the thing. It wasn't actually, yeah, sorry. Clearly I'm not good at synopses. Okay, so what happens then is, well, obviously the time travel thing does work, otherwise we would have no novel. The guy turns up in like a, what's it called? Like a housing estate in, where is it? Do you, maybe Bob remembers. Well, somewhere in London, but I can't remember where.
A bad neighborhood.
Anyway, like a low income place, blah, blah. And because he's grown up in this matriarchy, he is, you know, he was completely sort of emasculated, and he has really no skills that one should have if one wants to be an assassin, and especially if one wants to survive an estate like that. So, you know, it's quite comical in a lot of ways. And yeah, what else can I say about it? What do you want to add?
No, I think that's a good summary of what this book is, at least without going into spoilers. And we should sort of note at this point that we will eventually talk about spoilers, but we're going to announce before we get there. So this first bit will be just a sort of broader discussion about the book before the spoilers. But obviously with some of the twists and turns in this book, that may be difficult to do. So we may allude to some bits and then come back to them again later for a wider discussion. Fraser, how did you find the book?
I liked it quite a bit, which was quite a feat because I generally don't like this amount of satire saturating the prose. I don't think like every joke landed for me or anything like that, but the macro elements that Marc is clearly trying to shine a light on worked really well for me. There was a few jokes that did make me laugh out loud. For instance, the hyper homage to Terminator as the text of their masculinity. At one point, they are debating if the third Terminator has a woman in it, and they're saying that's sacrilege and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff that pokes fun at masculinity and toxic masculinity, and that all worked for me. And then him not actually having the tools other than being traditionally attractive to, you know, get in with this woman, Haley, who's the mother of the child, in order to kill her, was also something that worked for me. He's bumbling and oafish, but also like kind of like sweet and kind, and those juxtapositions kind of work because of what the text sets up at the beginning and how the matriarchy oppresses the men, and what transpires to construct their new sense of identity, basically. And I really liked the butterfly effects as well, where in game design, what we would call this is failing forward. So he is in a specific timeline to begin with, and then every time he fails, the text sort of like goes back to the fail point, the fail state, and then it goes forward again, which is not something that I've read before in science fiction, I think. So I really enjoyed it. How about you?
As Zena, what were your thoughts?
It's me again. Well, I mean, I feel like Fraser was very coherent here. Well, anyway, okay, so I also liked it quite a bit. I didn't like it quite as much as the other work that I've read by Marc. But on the other hand, I think all the other stuff I've read by him is a lot more recent. And this one is from 2012. So, 10 years ago. So, in 10 years, a lot happens in terms of writing. And yeah, obviously, I feel like, I guess I got more enjoyment out of the prose and the sort of the wordplay and stuff out of it, in his newer stuff. But you can see a lot of that in here already. And of course, this is also like a very, very different tone because of the satirical element. And, I guess, sci-fi. Also hadn't read any sci-fi by him before. And I think I can tolerate a lot more humor in my books than Fraser. And yeah, a lot of it did land. Not necessarily every single thing, but yeah, definitely a lot of it. And yeah, the Terminator part, it was just, I don't know. It was just so ridiculous, but really well done. And especially the whole idea that, there's sort of this, what is the word? No, it's not apocryphal, is it? No, I'm not sure if I'm using this word correctly. Anyway, that there's parts that are lost of this, sacred. Or not, it's not sacred, right? Because it's like it's an underground thing, right? They're not supposed to have this, and there's parts that are lost, and they've sort of built this whole idea of masculinity around it, and they don't even know how the story actually unfolds. So yeah. Anyway. It's hilarious. I wasn't sure about the complete sort of, the way that the matriarchy oppresses men. I know that Fraser said something about that. Well, you didn't now, but we did in the discussion, and I'm sure we'll get to it at some point. Like parts of it I thought were really great, but then others, maybe it was in that moment where sometimes the satire bit went like that tiny bit too far for me. But yeah, it was all right. It was still very fun. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and the actual idea of how this whole time travel thing works, and changing the past and whatever. I mean, that's always really, a bit of a mindfuck. And we talked about it for quite a long time. And I thought it was, let's put it that way, it was clearly very well thought out, as in, it wasn't just one of those Oh, I can clearly see your flaw, the flaw in your thinking right there immediately, right? So yeah, that was interesting, and but I'm still not sure quite how it worked. So yeah, here's my incoherent thoughts. What about you, Bob?
No, I mean, I agree. I think that's the thing. I've sometimes found that I don't always have an in route into sci-fi. I sometimes find it a bit difficult to read because I'm just maybe not as familiar with it. And so I kind of appreciated that it was a book that didn't particularly heavily rely on the ins and outs of time travel or sort of very specific sciencey bits to kind of get you through. Instead, it was just quite fun and kind of almost felt like a sort of pastiche of a time travel film, almost, or something like that. It had that kind of um self-knowing sort of, and so kind of, yeah, that kind of knowingness to it, that it was sort of able to sort of drop in something quite sci-fi and kind of be like, isn't it cool, time travel, woo, and then kind of go off on its own sort of thing, in a way that I didn't feel was sort of, yeah, I found that quite accessible and quite fun. And I think actually picking up, Zena, what you're saying as well about the kind of intricacies of language, I think I found really quite fun in a few parts as well, of these sort of little word plays or little puns that were kind of in there just for joy. There wasn't really a sort of specific point that had to be made with them. It was sort of almost, you could just sort of see Mark at his laptop kind of be like, yeah, I'm going to put that in there. And actually, I really love when writers have that kind of degree of confidence and kind of self-possession, I guess, I'm not sure if that's the word, to kind of put that in, and kind of just put it in for the fun of it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I did get a little bit lost occasionally with the story, but I think that is more of a me problem, because I think I just sort of, I read it all quite quickly. I should also note at this point that I was the absolute worst buddy read partner, because I basically was just like entirely silent on the chat about this and then just finished the book by myself in a day. So like, but I think, yeah, lots of really fun stuff kind of going on in the book. I'm kind of interested in sort of picking up a little bit about what we were just saying there about the kind of the idea of sort of flipping this on its head, of having a matriarchy and sort of having a sort of a man trying to escape it by kind of doing that, because I think at times that also led to some quite interesting discussions of the sort of like the ridiculousness of some of his tasks, of sort of, you know, Terminator being the sort of paragon of masculinity that they're sort of striving for, but also that almost in sort of trying to take down the matriarchy, there are still some quite sexist assumptions that are going on from men to women for him to try and take that down, if that makes sense. Like, it's still almost rooted in a sort of a sexism that we would recognize in our society, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense from how I'm describing it, but yeah. And so kind of keen to get your thoughts on how you thought the sort of the matriarchy part of this book held together.
I think that it was mostly successful because, yeah, like it interrogates really traditional notions of masculinity in a fun way. For instance, they're not allowed to build muscle, and so he's attractive, but he has no ability to actually look like the Terminator. Like he can't fulfill that fantasy at all, and it sets him up to be really bad at conflicts with other men that he lands into, because they're all sort of like rough and tumble and from the streets and and stuff, and he's just sort of like, can you do this now? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, what do I do now, basically? And sometimes he just gets the shit kicked out of him by other people. There's also like an interesting motif that's like macro to it, with the Rastafarian DJ, who at first was really obtuse to me, and I was like, why is this guy even here? Is he just DJing him getting beat up, basically? But it turns out to be like a pretty useful visual motif for the different tracks that he's laying down as the different timelines. So as something is being remixed, for instance, like he'll fail, he'll go back to the original, sample something else, incorporate it, and then do a remix of it. And so it just like really works with what's happening in the fiction at the same time. And so there's also like a satirical bent, like you were saying, on him being oppressed in the first place. Like it's not, I think it would be more complicated and more problematic if he actually was like as oppressed as he ostensibly is purporting to be. But instead we see how stupid and silly even his notions of masculinity and what the future would become if they were to succeed actually plays out by. So I thought that was done pretty well. And like Sina, I think I found the prose work to be less, I don't know, crafty. Is that a word? Left, I like his newest effort much better on the prose level than this one. But I also think it's hard to pull off what he was trying to do because it's a gateway for commercial fiction and literary fiction. Like I could see that maybe he was trying to straddle the line between literary and sci-fi. So it's hard to like also gauge the prose work at a full level too, because I wasn't sure what the intent is as well. But yeah, overall, you can definitely tell that it's Marc Nash writing the book, which is a big plus for me.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of. I think it was probably done deliberately because it works for this book. Like you said, I'm not sure it would work that well if it had been written in the same kind of style as he writes, like now, or like I've not finished it, but I did at one point start his first novel, and that one also has like a higher level of prose, if you can say it that way. Like it's different. You know what I mean? Like it's like denser to read and a bit more sort of, you need more concentration, blah blah. Whereas this one is a lot more accessible. And I think, I think it was done on purpose because it works for this kind of story. The only thing that I was not 100% sure about really was this was some of the puns that were quite clever, that were put in the dialogue between certain characters, because I couldn't quite buy that these people would actually make these kinds of puns, if that makes any sense. But I mean, nonetheless, I still enjoyed them. It was just sort of like, would they though? Would they?
Because they're too dumb for it.
Kind of, yeah. Or, especially with like this guy, I was like, well, how educated will he be if he's like been, oppressed in the matriarchy and he's basically just there to clean houses or something like that. But yeah, that being said, I still enjoyed them. And I think I forgot, I lost my train of thought because I think I wanted to comment on something else, but I've forgotten again. Sorry.
No problem. I think, but yeah, I think those puns were, I mean, that's an interesting point, I think, about how obviously there is always that thing, right, of sort of, there's something that can feel quite authorly or writerly, and sometimes you are like, actually, maybe these characters wouldn't necessarily have done this or said this. This is clearly the sort of author's voice, but I did think that was still quite fun, at least as a reading experience, to have those all in there. And then kind of just in terms of it, the sort of time travel aspect, before we get into spoilers, how did you find that part working for you? Like that, because that's obviously such a central kind of conceit of this book, is about the time travel aspect. How did that work for you?
Do you mean me or Fraser? Because I feel like Fraser is the best suited to comment on it from the sci-fi perspective. No? I think so.
Sure. Well, we could both say how much we liked it. But I thought it was interesting because I hadn't seen it before, and I've read quite a bit of sci-fi. I am, of course, aware of the butterfly effect, like butterfly flaps its wings and there's a typhoon in Peking or something, whatever the saying goes. So I expected something kind of like that, but instead it's like that rerouting of the groove and then going forward. And so I thought that nicely sidestepped some of the stuff that you would have to put in as a writer and probably bloat the book somewhat just to get from timeline to timeline and clip off the edges of each of them. Instead, it just sort of is like, okay, let's backtrack. He messed up. Let's go back here. And now he's going to try this. And now he's going to try this. And because there's, I would say, like 3 main grooves or whatever to the tracks, the tacks that he tries in order to get in with Haley. It's interesting because there's like a sort of remixed version of multiple of them, which does make it slightly more confusing, but it also makes it more enticing because you have no idea what will happen next and what will lead to his next fail state. And some of them are very funny. Like one, he simply just goes to the washroom and gets enamored with the urinals because bathrooms back home have not been made for men before. So he just sort of marvels at the urinal for a while. And by the time he gets back, Haley's just dipped out and she's like, obviously this guy is weird and I don't want to be around him or something. He also has no money, so he appears like a deadbeat to her. And he's not very manly. So really it is just failing forward. Like he's not decisively putting all of his skills to work. He is just stumbling into the timeline where ostensibly he may succeed or not, depending on, spoilers at the end. So I thought it was interesting.
Sorry, but I thought maybe he is using all of his skills. They're just rather limited. I mean, I don't know. But yeah, I think, you reminded me of the urinal scene. I think what he also manages to do is piss somebody off, like properly. And I think that is the perfect choice of word for this. Yeah, because I think this guy thinks he's staring at his penis or something like that, just for that moment too long. Because he's so confused by how the whole thing even works. Anyway, that was not the topic, right? The topic was time travel. I was really amazed that you actually tried to figure out how many tracks there are. I have no clue. I just know that it was like, I mean, I didn't even realize this whole music remix part of it until much later on. And I remember I kept sort of going, but how does it work? Like, does he get sent back when he fails? And then does he then go back again? But wouldn't he then encounter himself? And just, this sort of typical time travel questions and conundrums. And at some point I was like, this is probably what he meant. But it took quite a while. And yeah, but it was really interesting how that was done. And I really liked the idea of having, like you said, like these different mixes, which also made me think, I think, we talked about this, right? That this had been like an adapted play. And I was then imagining how that would look, right? When you have a new scene, and how, I guess, if you were somebody, I don't know, how do you say it? Is that a stage designer? Or the production or whatever? I think that would be quite a lot of fun to sort of, recreate it and just change it a little bit here and a little bit there and add like maybe something fun in the background that, sort of changes, that makes it a bit obvious that this is a different timeline now and that sort of thing. I was just sort of imagining that to be quite fun. But that was also probably, sorry, now I'm getting into, no, I'm digressing. I'm going to stop myself there.
Well, if you are, I mean, that could be a good time to go into spoilers if you are happy, if there are no other pre-spoiler bits that you wanted to talk about.
I'm not sure if it was a spoiler. It was just it had nothing to do with time travel.
Fair enough. Well, shall we descend the curtain of spoilers? That was a very clunky way of saying that. Don't know why I did that. Let's now move on to the sort of spoiler territory, because I think so much of this book hinges on quite a few bits that probably we can't discuss without really going into spoiler territory. So viewers, you have been warned. And we'll start going a bit onto spoilers. And I think obviously time travel, and kind of as you hinted at the beginning, I think, Zena, the time travel aspect is a really big part of that ending of the book. And kind of we almost have a promise right from the beginning of how we think it might play out. How did you find sort of either the ending or kind of some of the sort of later parts of the book, particularly in terms of how we sort of resolve some of these plots?
So what was interesting about the whole, like, how is this gonna sort of pan out, right? Is that obviously you're always trying to figure it out, you're always trying to guess, blah, blah, blah. And there were a few things that I guess seemed too obvious, or, you know, for a moment I was like, no, this can't be, like, well, basically Fraser called it, or I thought he had called it. And then I was like, oh no, but I wouldn't expect that from Marc Nash. Like, you know what I mean? It would be too obvious. Like, I think maybe, but I was still sort of going, but it looks like it's going that way. I'm still trying, we're in spoiler territory, so I may as well, right? Yeah. So at some point then, obviously we all know Terminator, I'm assuming. And yeah, Fraser then at some point thought, okay, I think the guy is gonna like abandon his mission and basically fall in love with Haley and actually be the father of the person who will start this whole revolution. And you know, fuck the future. Like, I'll just stay here and do my thing. And I was like, no, it can't happen that way. It can't happen that way. But it really, really looked like that. But then, of course, it doesn't. And I thought that twist was really well done. I thought that was really, really well done, because it was quite somehow, like, even though, you know, we keep going back in time, in the beginning, it's not so tense, it's more like, it's sort of very, very sort of entertaining. You're like, oh, what's going to happen in the next installment of this, blah, blah, blah. But then at the end, I was actually like tense in the sense of like, ooh, how is this going to resolve? Is there going to be like, you know, because also the bits got shorter and shorter and shorter. So you kind of like, yeah, anyway, so that was really good. And I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I don't want to go on and on and on.
No, I mean, I agree. I think I found that end quite sort of satisfying after all of that, because I think I was worried it would go down sort of quite cliched or quite sort of standard, kind of a fairly standard approach. But I kind of was pleasantly surprised by sort of how it tied up, and sort of I found it still quite funny, almost that it sort of feels like so much of the book is almost the main character, that what's his name again, the guy,
T10 or F10.
Yes, thank you.
F10, yes.
And I kind of liked that the whole book basically felt like the world was against him, in this sort of quite comical way of him sort of trying something and like, oh no, and he failed again. But in a way that never really felt too cruel. It was always sort of, he, you know, it was often his fault when these things happened. So I kind of, in some ways, found that ending then kind of fit that quite nicely for me. Of sort of it sort of seemed to sum that up and kind of tie it up in quite a funny, sort of bizarre kind of way. How did you find it, Fraser?
Yeah, I really liked it, because I was pretty sure that I had it right. Because I was like, okay, if I remember Terminator right, that guy goes back, he ends up being the father, you know, we end at the beginning kind of thing. Yeah. So I was like, okay, so he's definitely going to end up being, you know, the progenitor of whatever the woman's name that becomes the figurehead for this new matriarchy state, which apparently one of the things I didn't quite like is that alludes to the fact that this world would be our own, which I kind of don't like in sci-fi or any books really, where I'm kind of like, you know, we don't need the conceit of this being our world because we're in fiction already. But otherwise, I really enjoyed it because the power dynamic is always where it should be, because he, like, it both shows that him growing up in a society where he's oppressed does not give him the tools in order to succeed. And we can extrapolate from that our society would be doing that right now to people as well, which I thought was like pretty deft. But then also he's rejected as a father because he similarly doesn't have the tools to be a good father or to be a good partner, and he's good for like a tumble in the hay supposedly, and that's about it. So that felt like it was simultaneously like, oh, poor little guy, but also good. You know, I was just like, yeah, like it's just a sort of like perfect ending that I didn't see coming, because I was like, oh yeah, he'll just end up being, you know, kind of somewhat satisfying in terms of being like the homemaker of the home,
Right.
and raising the kid, and that will be ironic because he'll be raising the child that subsumes his gender or whatever.
Right.
But instead, he's just chucked to the curb. And I really liked how he brought all of the characters together too, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect the Rastafarian guy to like meet the other characters or anything like that.
Yeah.
But Haley ends up going to him in one of the timelines asking for like an abortion service. And then in a remix version, the supposedly like the end or whatever, she doesn't get the abortion, I think. Right? And he's also chucked to the side. So he still ends up birthing the society that he doesn't want, I think. Or she does get the abortion. I'm not sure. And
now I thought she does.
No matter what?
I thought there was no alternative in that sense. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah.
Now.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're right, because then it goes to the future with that guy that started it, and he witnesses the changes, and he ends up being,
and he's confused
in the patriarchy or whatever, and he's the only one that is ostensibly aware of the changes, it seems like, at the end, right? He's walking around his apartment and all is right with the world or whatever, because it's going into our future. So I guess, yeah. So it was even more surprising to me then, I guess.
Yeah. But see, I was going to say this, right, because of the ending and how it ends and how it kind of goes back to, well, basically our present, you know. I guess, you know, because we forgot about that, right? We keep talking about
our present future.
This was but like where he travels back in time is the 80s.
Yeah,
we didn't mention that, and obviously the music is in there. Like, you know, there's a lot of 80s music in there.
Hence also the title. Yeah.
Yes, time after time, exactly, and so we end up in, I guess, whatever may be our present, and which is why I think it made sense that he would have made it out to be like, you know, our world.
Right.
Because I think the whole thing comments on, you know, is a commentary on, you know, society as it is now, or when it was written, you know, whatever.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah. So in a way, then it made sense to me for it to not be like a complete fantasy world in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, what I found interesting was this whole, that he wakes up, right? And he wonders why his brethren aren't like rejoicing, and he's basically like, oh, okay, well, they weren't really expecting this, so they're probably just like getting their bearings, blah blah blah. And then he looks out and he wonders why there's no, like, what was it? Why there's no statues to him and to the other dude. And I remember like halfway through the book, we were all like, but why would there be any statues? Because people wouldn't know what they've done, because it wouldn't have happened. Like what is going on? Why would you be that stupid? But I mean, like you said, it was like, yeah, they are meant to be, like they're portrayed to be quite dumb or sort of bumbling buffoons that somehow, you know, have managed to figure out this time travel thing, but otherwise are not very competent.
Yeah. But I think that for me, I think also kind of squared something that I was worried about going into the book, of like, obviously if you're flipping it around and you're having a matriarchy and you're having guys trying to stop that, like, unless you do that with the characters. So I think this is quite clever of Mark Nash to do. Unless you do that with the characters, you run the risk of it basically turning into like a, yeah, we took down the women kind of book, which feels very different and would not be quite comfortable to read, of like, yeah, we reestablished a sexist system. Like, so actually I think that's what I sort of liked about that aspect of it. I think it works because he's this sort of clown character who just can't really do much right, and so as a result, we sort of see him doing this out of sort of self-interest, and the kind of, his goal isn't really equality. He sort of seems to just want to go back to being sort of feeling strong and powerful and Terminator-like, and so instead he kind of, I suppose that's, yeah, I think what I quite enjoyed, that it flips that round of like, actually, yeah, who are the sort of bad faith actors in this game? And someone like him is sort of, right up there, sort of it's entirely self-serving, really.
Yeah, and his just desserts is what every guy basically under heteronormativity seeks. Like a beer cozy, whatchamacallit, a good seat, and like a big plasma TV or whatever, right? So he's like, so instead of statues to which you could have, ostensibly claimed greatness or whatever, instead what you got was, this very easy, pathetic sort of existence. So it just feels, bringing it home.
The beer cozy. Oh, but what I found really, like, it was, what I found is, poignant about it was that he's got dog tags, right? So he's in the military. So one thing I didn't quite get is like, what, are you like a radio DJ thing in the military, like, like in Good Morning Vietnam or something? Like that was because he's got the dog tags, they are being just, they are specifically mentioned, blood type, blah blah blah, and and obviously, and he's wearing the he's got the fatigues or whatever, or what is it called? You know what I mean, camouflage stuff, whatever. It looks like uniform stuff. And to him, that obviously seems like an upgrade from the pinafore that he was made to wear beforehand. But I thought, wouldn't it be funny to actually see him suddenly faced with the fact that he's now got to like do A, physical exertion, and B, do like potentially really harrowing stuff, or have harrowing stuff happen to him, while he still has this sort of personality and memory of what happened before. Because I think that was obviously, like part of it was the commentary on that, right? Because one of the things that the matriarchy did in this book was also get rid of any violent conflict. I mean, men were oppressed, yes, but there was also no war. So I just thought that was such an, interesting bit, but obviously we never go there. We don't actually see that, but it, you can have that sort of as a thought in your head, like what's going to happen the next day or after that, or if he's like deployed or something like that,
I fear Fraser may have frozen. A frozen
Oh
Fraser.
no, yes. Frozen Fraser.
And so that starts to neatly bring us towards the end. Any final thoughts about the book? Fraser, Zena, whoever wants to start?
I've talked enough just now. So Fraser.
I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 star rating. I think if I had been a reader that appreciates, comedy and satire saturated in prose work, I would have gave it 5 stars instead. But in the end, it brought me around, even though I generally really dislike those things in prose. So I think that's a feat, I think, to pull off. Also, I have this weird preoccupation with people in sci-fi of a certain age, of Mark's age group. They always have a Rastafarian in their fiction. And I feel like that generation was hit hard by Bob Marley or something. Like they just always have a Rastafarian. Usually they're a DJ, but not always. I mean, even William Gibson had a whole bunch of Rastafarians in his original cyberpunk books and stuff. I don't know where it comes from, but it's just funny seeing that repeating motif in this as well, even though it's like a literary intersection with sci-fi. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Zena, your thoughts?
Sorry, it's just such a random thing. I mean, I'm not aware of it because I don't read sci-fi really, but it's just such a funny observation to make, I guess. We should ask Mark about that.
There's a PhD in there somewhere, I think, as well.
Sure. Oh God, yes. There'd be some people who'd love to read that thing, right? Definitely. Yes, I really liked this. For me, it was also 4 out of 5 stars. And I think the main reason would be probably that, like I said, like not all of the puns landed. And there was one other thing that I struggled with slightly, and I think it was part, and this was what I was going to say earlier anyway, and then I've stopped myself. The whole being adapted from a play thing, some of the choreography, I guess, of the scenes got very confusing for me. And I was wondering if, like, in a play that would obviously not have been a problem. Well, I guess, well, it depends really. Would there be stage directions or would there not be? But if there weren't, then, you know, you would still sort of assume that whoever then puts the play on, you know, they figure it out. And so if you're, you know, if you just go there and watch the play, it's fine, right? But for me, reading it, sometimes I was just like, what? How did this happen? Where is this? And what? And that was kind of a little bit disorientating, but although it was a very small thing, I guess, in the end. But yeah, also, maybe it's just because I'm comparing it to the newer stuff that I've read that is just a lot more sort of in my wheelhouse, I guess. But I feel like, I mean, 4 stars is like a really good rating anyway. It's just not like it's my perfect book, you know. So yeah, really enjoyed it, and it's a rather quick read, and like, yeah, as far as Marc Nash goes, much more accessible than the other stuff I've read.
So you're saying you want more description, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah, well, in this case, for once, oh, he's got me. Yeah, yeah. Oh man. Okay, this is like a thing that we have that we should, I don't know, should we comment on this? Because Fraser loves description and he needs it to be very specific because, yeah, and I'm not very good at imagining things anyway, so I get very impatient quickly with too much description. And for once, apparently, I need more.
I'm sort of somewhere in the middle, but where I sort of like the rhythm of books quite a lot, I think I've realized. And so sort of sometimes there can be something with tons of description or not very much, but if there's like a sort of rhythm that's propelling it forward, I'm kind of sold. Like A Passage North, for example, where I just sort of got really into that sort of flow of it, and at times I was like, I don't really mind what's being said, I just really like the rhythm of this. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I also gave it 4 stars. I think I really enjoyed it, particularly as it's sort of not a genre I typically read that much of. I really found it a lot of fun. I think it's also got a lot of those sort of typical, the sort of traits that I've sort of come to sort of expect in Marc Nash books that I've really enjoyed, like the wordplay, the sort of joy of language, and that sort of was really entertaining for me as well. So yeah, enjoyed it a lot overall. And again, yeah, definitely a quick read. But yeah, this has been us 3 discussing Marc Nash's book Time After Time. There is also a playlist that went alongside the book that is on Spotify and is mentioned in the notes of the book, and I'll put it in the description of this video as well. But yeah, this has been really fun. Really great chatting, and see you all soon.
Hopefully.
Bye.
Bye.